today we want to talk about conflicting diet. I think we should stick to diet today because, I mean, we can get into there's so much conflicting advice in general, but conflicting diet advice that you find on Twitter or, you know, even like studies, medical news, journals, etc. And like, it's so hard to navigate because like everyone has a very unique point of view, and a lot of it, like, you know, it seems to make sense.
Yes.
Especially, for example, when it comes to diets, like there's the paleo diet, there's the keto, there's carnivore, there's vegan, there's like repeat, there's, you know, like Indian vegetarian. There's just like so many diets that like all have merit, and it's like really hard to know like how to even like navigate this and how to figure out like the conflicting viewpoints amongst these different diets and food advice. And especially like now we're both meat eaters, and I think there's a lot of advice out there, especially put out by like organizations like World Health Organization and stuff, that tells you that meat can cause like prostate cancer. And so I think like today we'll probably just get into like we'll probably just get into like the tip of the iceberg of like trying to navigate some of this.
Yeah.
And maybe we can just sort of talk about like frameworks for how we navigate this information. And like when we're confronted with this new information, like how do we take it in and how do we update our mental models to either include that information or not include that information? Because it's important to like, I think it's important to not be dogmatic about these things too. Like be open-minded to views from all sides, but also not fall prey to like really crappy studies.
Right. Yeah. I think the easiest way to understand a lot of conflicting viewpoints in the diet space is similar to how you would try to interpret the different preachings of various religions, because, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of diets have religious or cult-like components to them. And a lot of popular world religions might seem like they're diametrically opposed. You know, they go to war with each other sometimes. But if you actually study what they're saying, you'd realize that a lot of times they have more in common than what they have different. And, you know, 70% of the commonality, you could say like completely opposite things, with 70% of the underlying practices that followers would, utilize to do it actually be the same. And so I think one thing that's important for people to understand is that no diet is perfect. Everything that you put in your body, for the most part, is both good and bad. And it depends on your particular use case, your particular body.
Yeah.
To determine what makes the most sense for you. But there are probably some commonalities across all of the various diet frameworks that hold true with all of them. And so, you know, at the very least, you could say, well, if they're all saying these, you know, like eat natural food, avoid processed food, like, okay, that's like, there's very few diets that will tell you to eat more processed food, right? So even if veganism and you know, carnivore diets they seem on the surface to be the opposite, the commonality is they want you eating real food, and ideally not like fried in seed oils. So if you eat real food and you don't eat food fried in seed oils, and you started by eating the standard American diet, you're probably going to feel better, at least in the beginning. Now, you know, you can have different deficiencies build up over time, but it's important to realize that even diets that I completely disagree with and don't follow have merits, and we can speak to those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like you said a lot, but the biggest the high level thing that I've realized is like, it's very individualistic. And I think it's super important to not just like copy paste someone else's diet, but really experiment with what works with your body and read and do research. rather than just parroting what, big names on social media are saying about meat or about veganism. Because they're just one person, and you are a human being, you have a brain, and you have the ability to critically think about this information. So the biggest thing that's helped me is, I say this because I used to do that when I had no idea what the hell I was doing when it comes to diet. And I used to just like parrot information that I read on like reputable sources or things I saw on Instagram or Twitter or whatnot. And it wasn't until I like went on my own independent research and started to read just like a diverse set of perspectives, that I realized like, okay, so there's a lot of experimentation that I need to do to see what works for me. And I'm still always experimenting. There's never a day or a week or whatever that I'm not trying something new to add to my regimen. But like, that's the only way you're going to figure out like what works and what doesn't work. There's some things where like I've read and I was like, oh my God, I have to do this. And then I try it and it like literally does nothing. And then there's some things where like I totally neglect it, and then I make that one change and it's like, holy fuck, like why didn't I do this like 2 years sooner? Right. Like it just seems so small. Why did I make this change sooner? And so I really just think like, that's just been my approach. And then the other big thing for me was like, I wish people actually read papers more. Because once you start reading research papers and medical, especially in like the medical research, you start to realize how susceptible these studies are to just like bias and fitting a narrative, or just like bad studies, And you're like, okay, because like when you don't do this, if you read a claim that someone puts out, like Mayo Clinic or, World Health Organization, and you're like, study says this. And like, if you're not used to the practice of reading studies, then you think that's truth. Right. You're like, oh, study says this, so like I must follow this. Right. But then once you start reading studies, you realize, okay, these are just human beings. They did a study on this many people. This is the variables that they manipulated to figure out this outcome. And then you start to be a little bit of a skeptic of these studies, and you start to be like, oh, okay, so this is just one data point. It's not like truth. It's just a data point. Right. And I think like you have to go and try to collect a bunch of data points and try to figure out like, what is that truth that you want to sort of believe? Yeah. And, I think you probably went through this, working at like Goldman and A16Z. And I went through this working at Google where, at least in the beginning, when you're surrounded by people with fancy degrees, you kind of like, you just give them the benefit of the doubt. And like, well, who am I to question what they're saying? But then when you listen and you listen closely and you try to rationalize the things that you're hearing, once you become confident in your own intellectual ability relative to, quote unquote, distinguished thinkers, then you realize like, yeah, they're just humans. No, they're not smarter than me. And no, math is math. And if their math is bad, I can read that that's bad math. And, that's completely objective for me saying, yeah, that's a bullshit study. Like, the math, the numbers behind this are wrong. And, one thing that, you and I noticed when we were, looking through different studies to discuss on this stream was that a lot of times the studies don't even publish the raw data. They just, when you read an article about meat is bad or, whatever it is, carbs are this, carbs are that, they just tell you what they concluded. They don't tell you, these are the numbers that we looked at. Sometimes they do. And when they tell you that these are the numbers that we looked at, oftentimes the numbers don't really line up with what the conclusion says. It's sort of like clickbait. When you read a headline for some article, you click it, and then you read the actual article, you're like, this title has nothing to do with the content that's in the article, right? So this is just like disinformation, 21st century disinformation that you need to become, equipped with the tools to understand how to dissect bullshit research. Yeah. And like, at first it seems like a lot of work, right? Like people are like, who the hell has time to do all this? Like, why wouldn't I just trust like XYZ organization to tell me the truth? But I think what I've realized at least is like the more you get used to critically thinking and reading papers, the easier it gets. So these days, like I don't spend like 2 hours reading a paper. I can like basically get the gist of the authenticity of a paper by spending like 5 minutes, 10 minutes on it.
Totally.
Because what I'll do is like, I'll read the abstract and I'll read sort of like, what is the premise that they're trying to, that they're basing this study under? Like really understand, like, what is the premise of the question? Because if that's flawed, then the outcome's going to be flawed, right? If they're framing the question in a very biased way, then the outcome's going to be flawed. And then I'll look at like, okay, like what's the sample size? What did they actually do? And then I won't read through like the exact math. Usually I'll trust the math. But I'll read the conclusion. So like mostly I'm really looking for the premise because like how people really frame the question really defines the answer. And I've noticed that just even doing that little bit of extra reading and research really helps me know whether that like the people who do the study are actually genuinely trying to do the study or they're just trying to come up with the predefined conclusion. Like we're talking about.
Yes. And that became apparent to me over the last few years where there's a tremendous amount of parallels between this and actually assessing physical movements. And what I mean by that is, a good trainer or, someone with decent athletic experience can watch somebody run or watch somebody lift weights and say that person had an injury that's causing them to favor something and, produce an asymmetric movement. That's an unnatural movement, or that is a dysfunctional movement pattern of that individual. The same thing is true with studies. You can look at the foundation of the study and you can say that this is a dysfunctional study, that this is not created to come to a natural conclusion that was determined with an open mind. Because, data is typically fairly straightforward. You can show on a regression graph, like this is how the data correlates. And the further you get from simply being transparent with this is what the data and this is, how A correlates with B, the more you have to ask yourself, why are they not just telling me the most obvious thing, right? Usually there's a reason if they're not going to tell you the most obvious thing. And it's usually because either they don't think that you're smart enough to interpret it or they're lying. And I always assume that it's the latter.
Yeah, it's that. And I think like, if we get into more specific examples, like the one we were looking at yesterday with the meat, the red meat, and processed meat causing prostate cancer. And was it prostate cancer? It was prostate cancer, right?
It was like prostate and colorectal or something like that. Yeah. And
what I found interesting, first of all, was like, it's so disingenuous for them to group red meat and processed meat into one study, because like you really should separate the arguments for them too, because they're very different. Even though they're on the outside, you can almost like fool people into thinking like red meat and processed meat is just meat. It's not. Those are very different things. And in the paper, they do make different conclusions for both. They say there's very limited evidence to say that red meat causes prostate cancer, but there is enough evidence to say that there's limited evidence for red meat, and then there is enough evidence for processed meat. So like, I just found the whole fact that they just grouped it all into one study, like very like disingenuous, because like as a reader, then like a reader who's not thinking, who's just like naively skimming through the paper will just in their brain be like, oh, red meat, processed meat, same thing. And they'll just like eliminate the two. Whereas like, they're probably a lot better off eliminating just the processed meat. And as I was reading the whole paper, it's like, it became so obvious that like they kept like saying that, red meat is shown to have some benefits, but like they wouldn't like, and they kept saying that there's limited evidence to show that it causes prostate cancer, but they would still at the end conclude that you should still try to limit red meat because we don't know. So it's like, how does that make any sense? If there's limited evidence, and how could you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, you almost have to think that the conclusion's sponsored by a corporation or something like that. It's like, yeah, you scientists can do the research, but this is what the conclusion's going to be, and like, you're smart enough to figure out how to back into it. And you can even see, like, because I think the World Health Study that came out that I can no longer find online, but was like really widely discussed maybe 4 or 5 years ago, was that for each 3 ounces of red meat that you consume a week or day or something like that, probably day, your risk of like colon cancer, prostate cancer goes up by 40%. Right. And so you can, if you're familiar with data, you understand how to honestly present data. And you also, especially if you have an investment banking background, you understand how to manipulate data in a way to make your case. And so if you actually read, between the lines, or actually just read down the page of that study when it came out, you would find out that, the data that they're looking at does show that for each 3 ounces of red meat consumed, there's a 40% increase in that type of cancer risk. What they're not telling you in the headline is that is a very rare cancer. And so they want you to jump to the conclusion that red meat is smoking. And because if you smoke, the chances of you getting a lung cancer or something like that are probably astronomically high in general, nominally. Not knowing, I would say probably 30% chance you'll get lung cancer from smoking cigarettes. That's what they want to see. They want you to see, okay, 30%, 40% of people who smoke cigarettes get lung cancer, 40% greater risk for eating red meat. Okay, I'm not going to eat red meat. What it's not telling you is that 1% of the population is going to get colorectal cancer, right, or colon cancer, whichever cancer they were discussing. And so it's only a 0.4% difference between people who are eating meat and non-meat eaters, and they don't know it's causal, right?
Yeah.
So when you're coming to the conclusion, so if it was an honest study, right, in the headline, they would tell you that meat eaters have a 1.4% chance of developing, colon cancer, colorectal cancer. They don't tell you that until like several paragraphs down, because if they told you that in the beginning, you wouldn't read the research paper. You'd be like, well, I'm probably not going to get it. Fine. Yeah. Which is the conclusion that I came to after reading the entire thing.
Yeah.
So like
the numbers matter so much. And I think like, it's just a shame that like, I know we're kind of I'm going to go a little bit off topic here, but like the fact that people don't read papers anymore is just like, the effect of modern media and how they've trained people to just like read headlines, because there's so much information being thrown at us every day. And so who the hell has time to actually dig into a paper? Let alone like people don't even finish a blog article, for God's sake. Right. Like, are they going to really dig into the research behind it? But I think like if you want to just be average Joe and just read average Joe articles and try to get your truth that way, then guess what? You're going to end up like average Joe, which is not very healthy in the modern day. But if you really want to like actually understand your health, you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper and put your thinking cap on and actually like dig through the numbers and figure this out. Or, buddy up with people, like make it a team thing, right? Like triangulate your information from different sources. Yeah. And just parrot information. Like the biggest thing that bothers me these days with diet stuff is like, I'll see it in my Twitter comments too. People are just parroting basically what they heard from someone else. And you're like, okay, like, have you actually critically thought about this? Right. Like, the whole carbs thing, like there's a lot of people that say like, you like all carbs end up turning into sugar. Like you don't need all that. You don't need carbs. Like your body doesn't need sugar. It can make sugar in other ways, like through ketones and blah, 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 glucose in other ways through ketones. But like, if you like are you just parroting basically what someone else said about the keto diet and how like you don't need sugar? Or like, do you actually understand the fact that like, just because your body can make glucose in other ways doesn't mean that you don't need carbs to survive? Like, there's a difference between like survival and actually like being like optimal. Right. So like, there's just so much stuff like that where I'm like, all right, like clearly people are not actually thinking about the information. They're just like parroting what someone else says.
Yeah, and if you think about what a lot of these diets have in common, even the diametrically opposed ones, we mentioned real food earlier. There's also typically a caloric restriction element to it because whether you're doing keto or carnivore or vegan, which are three very distinct diets, or intermittent fasting, all of them involve not being able to eat certain things, at least at certain times. And so if you're the typical American, you're eating like 3,500 calories a day, but your body probably needs like 2,200 calories a day. So it doesn't matter which path you take to not eat those additional 1,500 calories a day. If you take any of them, you're probably going to be better off than where you started. But the question is that the only way to get there? No, it's not. Is that the best way to get there? Well, it depends on your particular situation and how your body responds to what you eat, and the demands that you're placing on your body. Because a lot of these studies don't factor in exercise demand, right? They say, well, this food does this food does that. It's like, okay, I happen to train intensely several hours a week. What's that going to do for my protein needs? What's that going to do for my iron needs, right? What do I need? Because I'm not a sedentary American, right? So even if there was like the quote unquote best diet ever, unless my daily habits mimic the daily habits of the participants in that study or those studies, then it's not going to be relevant for me because, as I mentioned earlier, every food has both a pro and a con associated with eating it.
Yep.
And how those pros and cons relate to you depends exactly on what you do during your day.
Yeah, exactly. And like, this is the other negative part about just doing what studies tell you, is that you have no idea what the conditions of the participants are. You don't know their ethnicity. You don't know their body type. You don't know their lifestyle. You don't know their previous health history. So you just have to trust that somehow the scientists picked the right group of people. Probably not, but you do. And I don't trust that. And so you're going off of information that's based on a group of people that you have no idea whether they're similar to you or not, their body type is similar to you or not.
Right.
Versus you getting in tune with your own body and figuring out what really works for you. Like, it's as simple as that.
Yeah. So should we talk about, maybe it'd be fun to talk about the benefits of diets that we don't follow, right? Because we're obviously talking about the benefits of diets that we do follow.
Yeah.
But, for the folks listening in, and feel free to ask questions, I could probably talk about a lot of the benefits of diets that I don't follow for specific reasons.
Yeah. Go for it. Which one do you want to pick? Vegan?
Okay. So if you want to do vegan, I'll do intermittent fasting, or we can do both. I'll do intermittent fasting, right?
Okay.
So
go for it.
I don't intermittent fast. And the reason I don't,
you don't, or you do?
I do not. And the reason I do not intermittent fast is because I need to eat a lot of food to sustain my training, right? So if I'm consistently under 3,000 calories a day, I will eventually get sick because I will continue to train hard and my body is just going off of fumes at that point. And so it doesn't make sense for me to, what I would say is, arbitrarily restrict the amount of calories that I'm consuming. Now, the average American, it might, because the average American's eating too much. So if they just force all their food to fit in an 8-hour window, guess what? You can't mindlessly snack if you're actually following intermittent fasting. And if you need to follow an intermittent fasting schedule to not mindlessly snack, maybe you should do it. The other thing is, because I don't have a family, I eat when I'm hungry. I don't have to eat around the hunger of other people. But if I did have a family and I was eating around the hunger of other people or the schedules of other people, that could, or more likely would, result in a caloric mismatch between what I need to eat and what I am eating, particularly if I'm worried, like, well, I don't know when I'm going to get my next meal, so I'm just going to eat a bunch now. Yeah. Like that's going to cause, definitely it's going to cause a short-term mismatch. My experience is it results in an unnecessary caloric surplus. It's never like beaten out of me because I'm consistently eating. And so if I were on an eating schedule that required fitting into the schedules of other people, then it might make sense for me to say, okay, well, I'm eating a little bit too much when I'm eating around the schedules of my wife and kids. So I'm just going to eat during this specific window.
Yeah. I think intermittent fasting, I'll share my perspective about intermittent fasting. And while I don't use it and it doesn't really work well for me and my needs, similar to you in the sense that I do train. And so I like to be fed before I train and after I train.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I've done the whole training on intermittent fasting stuff for months, and it just burned my body out in a really bad way. It even started to affect my mental health. And I was like, this is stupid.
Yeah.
Why am I in intermittent fasting but trying to train? Like, it just makes no fucking sense. Because like at the end of the day, you're not trying to this is not like a marathon. You're not trying to see what your peak of I guess mental, you're just not trying to push yourself to the edge in that way. You're trying to push yourself to the edge in strength, and it's just a different game.
Yeah.
So that was one. And two, I think women in general, some women just find that their bodies do better when they get more fueled throughout the day versus one giant meal.
Oh, interesting.
Me, like I said, I've found that a lot more helpful for me because if I do that really big meal as my first meal, if I do IF and do a really big first meal, I'll notice that I get really, really sluggish and tired after that. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I'm eating throughout the day, because my glucose level is probably quite steady throughout the day, I don't get those that sluggishness. So I can go the whole day without feeling I need to take a nap or something.
Yeah.
So that's the other reason. But my boyfriend does it, Alexander. Mm-hmm. He does intermittent fasting, and he's done it for a long time, and he's he loves it. In the morning especially, it keeps him clear in the morning, and and he also varies it depending on his training schedule. There will be times where he's not doing intermittent fasting, and then there are times when he is. So it's also
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's also important to realize that you don't have to it's not just because you're doing IF, you have to do IF every fucking day. Right. You can do it some days, maybe not do it some days, depending on what your schedule is that day, right? So I think it's important to not be dogmatic about this stuff.
Yeah, and then but we can also talk about the utility of dogma because realistically, we are multidimensional thinkers, and so we want to think about the nuance of, okay, in what situation is this applicable? Okay, so in this specific situation, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, yes, no. Some people don't actually have the emotional reserves to process complex thoughts. And as unfortunate as that is, it's the reality. And it is also the reality for why you'll see, a lot of carnivores or ex-vegans, a lot of fascists or ex-communists. It's okay, clearly you want a simplified view of the world to decide this is what your raison d'etre is, right? And if that's what you need, go for it, right? But understand that you're simply you're following a low resolution framework because you've decided that your brain can't handle high resolution, and maybe it can't, and so maybe that is the best for you. And seriously, maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so be it. That's a good point. It's if it's good enough, right? Then maybe that works for you. And some people, there's also a lot of people who aren't necessarily trying to get to the peak of their health. It's just not something they care about, maybe.
Yeah.
Even though I do think everyone should care about it. Some people just don't. So for them, just following a prescribed dogma might be just the easiest way, so they can focus on the things they care about.
Yeah, totally. All right, your turn about veganism.
Veganism. God, I've actually never done vegan, but I've done a moderately hot, mostly vegetarian diet in the past, where I was just eating fruits and vegetables, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to realize that that was probably an improvement upon what you were doing before. Otherwise, you likely wouldn't have stuck with it for however long you did.
That's true. It was definitely an improvement to what I was doing before, which is I was like eating a lot of processed food, like bagels, carbs,
Yeah.
donuts,
There you go.
cereal.
Yeah.
And so that, I guess compared to that, like definitely vegan is a step up. And so if you're going from the modern, American processed diet to go to veganism, you're probably going to feel amazing in the beginning. You're going to feel like you're eating clean, and then you're going to get some nutrients to your brain, and you're going to feel maybe better. You're going to get all that fibers. Maybe your digestion is a little bit better. I don't know. I'm sure like there's even some skin benefits to it. Although I've actually heard the opposite from a lot of vegans, but I don't know. There'll probably be, short term, there'll probably be some benefits. But once your body kind of catches up to some of the key nutrients it's missing, like specifically like protein and B vitamins, which a lot of people are really bad at getting through vegetables, and then iron. Mm-hmm. Then you just start to feel like shit. You lose hair, your nails get brittle, your skin gets gross. And that was starting to happen to me. Like I was starting to lose, like I have long hair. Like I hate the idea of like losing hair, but I was starting to lose hair, and my nails were getting brittle.
What did you had to have rationalized that at some point. Otherwise you would have like quit like that, right?
I didn't even think that it was my diet. I don't know what I thought it was. Like at the time I was just so busy with work and so stressed out.
Work stress.
Yeah. I thought it was stress. I thought, I knew that I was under eating, but I didn't know that, eating like just vegetables and fruits was not good. I thought that was like the holy grail of diet. But eventually it I obviously caught up to the truth and figured out like literally like within like probably 2 to 3 months of going to like starting to eat meat again, like all of that disappeared. And like I remember there was like, so I hadn't eaten a piece of steak ever. And then I remember the first time I ate a piece of steak, I forget who it was with, but
you don't remember who you were with when you had your first bite of steak?
It honestly might have been Alexander. I don't know.
This is a very monumental moment in someone's life.
No. It was in San Francisco. I remember I ate a piece of steak and I woke up the next day and like I just felt like a different human being.
Wow.
I was like, I have energy. Like I don't have to like drag my ass out of bed and like, force myself to walk to the gym and stuff. I was like this. I almost felt like this. I don't deserve this. Like I don't deserve this much energy. This feels weird. Like what the hell? Like is this how it is? This is not how it's supposed to feel. And then like I was like, okay, wow. Like I'm definitely missing something here.
Yeah.
And that's when I like tried to take red meat a lot more seriously.
Yeah, and that's something that you guys listening in. Anytime you have just a kick-ass workout, or it's just like, is someone putting steroids in my water? Like you got to realize it probably has to do with what you did over the last 24 hours. And so so even if you did something over the last 24 hours that, according to studies is not supposed to work, something that I've personally done is over the last several years is every time I've noticed that, I can train harder now. Or like, oh, interesting. Like this isn't supposed to work, but it is. Go with it. Like try it for a few weeks so you can get a reasonable sample set. And then if you've seen over a few week period that I'm doing this thing that isn't supposed to result in X, but it is over and over and over again, guess what? That's more valuable to you than reading a bunch of research papers that are done on other people, because you're doing the research on your own body.
Yeah. Like I think this point has to be like drilled into people's head over and over again, because no matter how many times you say it, they'll be like, but this study, it's like, who the fuck cares? Like biology is like an N=1 problem. Like figure out your own biology and then work from there. But again, like goes back to the fact that doing this takes a lot more courage, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because you have to like exit like the short the shortcut and actually enter your body. Like the shortcut is to read something and to try to like just apply it to it's like an algorithm, right? Like anyone can do that. A robot can read something and apply that diet to their body.
Right.
But to actually like get in tune with your own body and like an experiment, that takes a lot more courage, in my opinion, because you're stepping out of sort of like a predefined box that society gives you.
Yeah, for sure. We should probably talk about carbs before we hit the end, because we've discussed. I'm gonna put keto and carnivore kind of in the same box because they're more similar than not. They're probably cousins. So everybody listening in knows that while Preethi and I don't follow keto or carnivore diets, a lot of the things that we do eat in them would align with that methodology. But we also do eat carbs, and so we should probably talk about carb studies and to take a step back and discuss in general, why do low carb diets work? Generally speaking, if you adopt a low carb diet, most processed food is carb based. So if you are saying, I'm only going to eat 100 grams of carbs today, I don't think you're going to be able to eat all those chips in your pantry. I don't think you're going to be able to eat all of the processed food at the supermarket. So that's what I do. I don't eat the processed food at the supermarket. I don't typically buy chips unless they're cooked in oil that I trust. And so you get the benefit of eliminating a bunch of junk calories from your diet. Okay. And if you need that shortcut for saying, I'm doing low carb, so you can eliminate a bunch of these, worthless calories from your diet, fine. That's actually a good approach. The twist is when you actually lift weights and train.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because some people like Sean Baker, he says that he has no benefit from eating carbs, that his workouts are just as good, whether he's eaten a little bit of carbs right before or zero. Right. I asked him because I wanted to figure out, like, is it like a 1% drop for you, 2% drop? He's like, no drop, none. Like, okay, I can't work out without carbs, not for a sustained period of time. And maybe I haven't given it enough of a chance to work. Right. Because I did try a keto diet a couple of years ago. I did it for 2 weeks. And the first week, my lifts were really hard. Like I did the same lift as the week before, but the weight just felt heavy. But I could actually lift the same amount without carbs the first week as I could with them the week before. So I'm like, well, this is tough, but let me just run with it and see how things roll. Week 2 is not the same. Week 2, my lifts, I could not lift the same amount of weight that I could week 1 or the week before. And the most important thing in my diet fitness, framework is do the thing that allows you to have powerful workouts. And so it was clear to me that the one major switch that I made 2 weeks prior was getting in the way of me having powerful workouts. So I knew that if I stuck with it for longer, then my physique was going to eventually catch up to the lower demands that my training was placing on it.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is, like, I think I know the carbs have been shown to help like reduce cortisol after training and just help with recovery. Okay. So when I tried very low carb and to train hard, I was sore all the time.
Oh, interesting.
And then as soon as like I increased my carb intake and a little bit, I was just recovering faster. And my cortisol was a little bit more in control. And so I think, like, again, if you're training hard, like, you need some amount of carbs. So going back to your earlier point about low carb, like, I really think like the success of diets like low carb, keto, carnivore, they're all really just successful because they're elimination diets at the end of the day, in the sense that they limit how much processed food you can eat.
Yeah.
And that is like basically probably the foundation of a good diet, right? You want to eat whole foods and you want to try to avoid processed foods. Like it's really hard to eat high carb diet off. I mean, maybe not. Some people can do it like off of fruit, I was going to say, but some people can actually eat a lot of fruit, including myself. But it's really hard to do worse than the modern diet with any of these like elimination diets.
Yeah. And the other thing is that a lot of people are protein deficient. And so if you put a protein deficient person on diet and you say, now you can't eat carbs, well, they're still going to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're going to end up eating more protein. And so a lot of the reason why these diametrically opposed diets work is they touch on something that's tangential to the actual diet. So the low carb diet doesn't say eat more protein, but you end up eating more protein when you're on a low carb diet, and you probably need to eat more protein, especially if you're lifting weights.
Yeah, exactly. And then as a result of eating more protein, your appetite is probably a lot more, it's a little bit more suppressed because protein suppresses your appetite. So then you probably eat less. And so it's just like a trickle effect of like why all of these diets work. Basically because they force you to reduce your processed food intake. They force you to eat more protein, and then they probably force you to eat less too, because you're just not that hungry anymore if you're not eating junk food and you're eating real food.
And you're conscientious about what you're putting in your mouth, which is one thing that is probably very intuitive to you and me and other people who are into fitness. But a lot of Americans don't realize that food isn't air. And so air, you breathe the air that's in front of you. It's a real hassle not to. Food's not like that. You don't have to eat the food that's been presented to you, that's in your face. You can say, no, I don't want that. And that's just like the craziest thing. You know, I'll go to like some happy hour, you know, pre-COVID, and, you know, they're serving chips or whatever. My colleagues are like, oh, you're so healthy. It's like, I mean, it's just like, this is just not something that I eat. I eat delicious food. You guys see all the time that I'm, you know, all day, and you make fun of me for it all day. Right. So clearly I'm not, you know, placing random restrictions on myself just because it's quote unquote unhealthy. It's just like, I just don't eat that, and you don't have to just because it's given to you. But then the other thing is, you know, because I'm always well fed, I'm never
craving these things.
Yeah. And I'm never in a position where I'm like, well, you know, I'm hungry and this is the food, so I'm going to eat it. It's like, I'm never like that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. When you're well fed, it's like, even you can have a little bit of it, but like you will never gorge on that stuff. You'll just feel like shit.
Yeah.
Because once your body's so used to feeling good, you know when you feel like shit, and you obviously know it's probably something you ate.
Yeah, for sure.
Like why would you want to on purpose feel like shit? So then like, you know, your brain's just like, okay, I'm not going to do the thing that makes me feel like shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other diets that we should touch on? I mean, I
honestly,
feel like we covered all of them.
Yeah. No, there's a lot more. There's like, I mean, we can get into some of the more extreme ones, like, you know, the repeat diets, like the primal diets. There's even like an Ayurvedic diet that like deep Ayurvedic practitioners follow. There's like the alkaline diet. There's there's a blue zones diet. There's like the Japanese diet. Like there's so many.
But these diets, they're all, I mean, do any of these diets substantially deviate from the core principles of they're calorically restrictive and favor real food? No,
they'll
that's what they all are.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're just assembling dots in a different way, and the end result is we're eating real food and we're eating less.
Yeah. Basically.
Yeah.
So I think we covered it all. So should we end it here? I don't think we have questions this time. Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone's safe out there, and not stuck in a storm like Alex is.
Like me. I'll make it though. Got my 6 pounds of beef earlier today, so I'll be set until the sun comes out.
How long will that last you?
6 pounds normally 3 or 4 days.
So about 2 pounds a day.
2 pounds on the heavy side. Yeah. I haven't been that hungry the last few days, fortunately, I guess. And so, like last week I was eating maybe 230 grams of protein per day just because like my body was craving it. And this week I've been like 150 because I've been pushing myself to get there because that's kind of like the floor where I'm like, I want to get to 150 a day, like kind of no matter what. And it's like, it's been not easy to get to 150 grams a day just with my hunger the way it is. So fine, just roll with it. It's cool.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. I'll see you next week then.
See you guys.